Let me explain something to you youngsters, you newbies who became Star Trek fans when the Kelvin timeline movies started, or when Discovery premiered, or maybe even more recently than that, maybe all you kiddies who are about to watch Star Trek for the first time when Prodigy debuts, whenever that is. Let me explain something. You don't know what it means to suffer. You're anxious about whether or not you're going to get to see the Pine and Quinto versions of Kirk and Spock again? You think it's going to be hard waiting for the next season of one of the half-dozen Trek series currently in production? You understand nothing. I was there, okay? I was there in June of 1990 when Captain Picard was assimilated by the Borg. I was there when Riker ordered Worf to fire on the Borg cube, commanded by Locutus, okay? And I had to wait. All summer, I had to wait to find out what happened to Captain Picard. And if you weren't there, you don't know. And you can't judge me, and you can't tell me a damn thing about how much it sucks to have to wait for new Star Trek. Jesus Christ. I was 10 years old. I was just a kid. Even today, over 30 years later, knowing how it all worked out, I can't shake those feelings. I still sit bolt upright in bed in the middle of the night, skin slick with cold sweat, heart pounding, lungs heaving for oxygen. And as my mind races, thoughts come to me unbidden. Questions? No, not questions. Just one question that, even after all these years, sends a chill racing up my back. What if Captain Picard hadn't actually been rescued from the Borg? Before we start contemplating the ifs, Marcellus Wallace style, it might be useful to summarize how Captain Picard got in the situation where he needed to be rescued from the Borg. I know it's arguably the most well-known episode in the entire run of Star Trek The Next Generation, but I'm going to do this anyway because it's kind of my gimmick. So, let's talk about the finale of TNG's third season, The Best of Both Worlds. The Borg are back and Starfleet's in big trouble. Hey la, de la, the Borg are back. After discovering that a Federation colony has been scooped right off of a planet, the Enterprise rendezvous with Admiral Hansen and Lieutenant Commander Shelby, who suspect the colony's destruction was the work of the Borg. Shelby is an expert on the Borg, and Hansen tells Picard that she'd make a good replacement for Commander Riker, who has been offered a promotion to captain of the USS Melbourne. Shelby and Riker get off on the wrong foot when she's all like, "I want your job!" And Riker goes, "Well, I hate to disappoint you, but that promotion? I ain't taking it." Later, Riker's talking over some things with Picard, and Picard says, "What are you still doing here, you loser? Why don't you take the promotion?" And Riker's like, "Why would I want to be the captain of a bucket like the Melbourne when I can just stay aboard the Enterprise?" And Picard's like, "God, you're such a dork. On the Melbourne, you'd get to be the captain. You stay on the Enterprise, and you ain't never going to be the captain, because I'm the captain. And nothing's going to happen, certainly not in the very near future, to take me out of that captain's chair. Nothing! Do you hear? You hear, suit sap?" Well, it turns out it was the Borg who took out the colony, and the Enterprise runs across the Borg cube, and the Borg hail Picard, and they're like, "Hey, beam yourself over here, or we're gonna kill you." And Picard's like, "No, thanks." And the Enterprise fights with the Borg and manages to get away and hide in a nebula, and Picard's taking a late-night walk and winds up in 10 forward, and Guinan's like, "We're closed." Just kidding. She asks Picard if he's having trouble sleeping, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm having trouble sleeping. The Borg are about to kill us all. What the hell?" Guinan reassures him that even if the Borg blow up the Enterprise and destroy the Federation, that won't be the end. She tells him, "Look at my people. The Borg destroyed our civilization, but there's still a few of us scattered across the galaxy, so they didn't wipe us completely out, technically." Picard's like, "Thanks, I feel a lot better." The Borg cube forces the Enterprise out of the nebula and chases it down, and Borg drones beam aboard and nab Picard and then warp away on a direct course for Earth. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts they ain't paying a social call. Anyway, aboard the cube, the Borg are explaining to Picard what's about to happen, which I think is very courteous of them. They don't have to do that. The Borg are like, we decided we want a human voice to speak for us when we're introducing ourselves to your society right before we destroy it. And you're it, because your ship is boss, and you seem like you've mostly got your shit together by human standards. And Picard's like, seems like you're really reaching to justify abducting me, but whatever. I don't want to help you, so I'll be resisting. And the Borg are like, resistance is futile. Is that something?
It's our catchphrase.
Oh. Okay, because I've never heard you say it before, so...
It's new. We haven't had a chance to get it over yet.
I see.
It's going to be huge.
No, I believe you. Geordi and Wesley have developed a weapon that might be effective against the Borg cube, but in order to use it, the ship has to be stopped. So Commander Shelby leads an away team over to the cube to try and knock it out of warp and also rescue Captain Picard. They blow out a few distribution nodes with their phasers, enough to force the ship to stop, but when they run into Picard, he's already been all Borged up. So they beam back to the ship, and Shelby's like, we need to go back with a bigger team and get Picard out of there. But Geordi warns that the Borg ship is already regenerating, and Riker knows if they don't use their new weapon now, they may not get another chance. So he tells Worf to get ready. Then, in case anyone thought things weren't shitty enough, Picard calls him up from the cube and says, hey, just so we're clear, I'm totally hashtag Team Borg now, and I'm changing my name to Locutus. And, oh yeah, resistance is futile. Hey, you were right, that catchphrase is a banger. And Riker's standing there like, push that camera in nice and tight, because I'm about to explode some nerd skulls. Mr. Worf, fire. That was followed by the dreaded to be continued, which, if you were watching when the episode originally aired, was the producer's way of saying, see you in September, suckers! Now, over the years, a legend has grown up around this episode that the producers themselves didn't know whether or not Captain Picard was going to make it. There's been speculation and occasionally outright claims from fans and other people who have no way to actually know that Patrick Stewart's contract was up for renewal, or that he was unhappy and wanted to leave the show, or that the producers wanted to use the possibility of killing off Picard to pressure Stewart to renegotiate his contract. But as far as I can tell, none of that is true. Not exactly. It is true that when they were making The Best of Both Worlds, nobody knew how the cliffhanger was going to be resolved. In fact, at one point, Michael Piller, the writer of that episode, didn't even think he was going to be the one who had to resolve it, since he was planning to leave the show. That didn't happen, obviously. Piller remained on TNG and went on to co-create the next two spin-offs, Deep Space Nine and Voyager. However, even though they weren't sure what was going to happen in Part 2 of Best of Both Worlds, that resolution was always going to include the rescue of Captain Picard. While there had been some conflicts between Patrick Stewart and the producers, as well as the rest of the cast, by the end of the show's third season, those issues were mostly smoothed over, and everyone knew Patrick Stewart would be back for Season 4. They weren't quite sure how they were going to get there, but it was a foregone conclusion that by the end of The Best of Both Worlds Part 2, Captain Picard would be safely back in command of the Enterprise, and, because Jonathan Frakes wasn't going anywhere either, Riker, who had assumed command of the ship in Picard's absence, would be back by his side as the ship's first officer. But what if it went another way? What if the producers of TNG decided that Picard wouldn't be rescued for whatever reason? Patrick Stewart was sick of doing Star Trek and asked to be released from his contract. The producers made a purely creative decision to take the show in another direction. It doesn't really matter. What would Star Trek The Next Generation have been like from Season 4 onward without Patrick Stewart? Without Captain Picard? Before our nerdy speculation can go any further, we need to figure out who would have replaced Picard as the captain of the Enterprise. As I see it, there would have been two options: promote from within, or go with an outside hire. We get a glimpse of what the outside hire option might have looked like a few years after Best of Both Worlds in the Season 6 two-parter Chain of Command, when Picard is temporarily replaced by Captain Jellicoe, played by Ronnie Cox. My appreciation for Captain Jellicoe is well established. The very first Trek Actually episode is a defense of Captain Jellicoe, as a matter of fact. At the time I made it, I saw it as a standalone video. I had no idea it would be the start of a popular series to which I'd be shackled for the rest of my life! Of course, had Picard been written off the show permanently at the start of Season 4, there's no reason to assume, if the producers did go with an outside hire, that his replacement would have been Captain Jellicoe or a similar character. Jellicoe was gruff and pugnacious. He was an intriguing guest star and made an excellent foil for Riker, but it's unlikely the producers would have permanently replaced the passionate and eloquent Picard with a character as prickly as Jellicoe. This is TNG, after all, the dramatic equivalent of a cup of herbal tea and a hug from your grandma. In fact, I think it's unlikely that the producers would have gone with an outside hire to replace Picard at all. If Best of Both Worlds Part 2 had ended with the death or some other form of permanent loss of Picard, I think the creators of TNG would have followed what they set up at the end of Part 1 to its natural conclusion and had Riker get promoted to permanent captain of the Enterprise. Which, and I know this is the last thing you'd expect me to say, I think would have worked out fine. That's not just my deeply felt, somewhat disquieting love of Commander Riker talking either. I'm quite open, in general, to giving replacements of beloved characters a chance. Doesn't mean I'll always end up liking them, but I think they at least deserve their turn at bat. When I was a kid, I was saddened by the death of Optimus Prime, of course, but I was also genuinely excited by his replacement, Rodimus Prime. I even asked for and got a Rodimus Prime toy for Christmas that year. He was my favorite Transformer for quite a while after that. A couple of months before the Best of Both Worlds originally aired, Hulk Hogan lost the WWF title to the Ultimate Warrior. Being 10 and not yet realizing what a massive asshole Hogan was, kayfabe and in real life, I was a devoted Hulkamaniac. But after I got over the initial shock of Warrior winning the title, I also still thought pro wrestling was a legit sport at this point, by the way, I found the prospect of a fresh, new, largely untested champion kind of thrilling. It didn't work out that way, and later I found out the Warrior was just as big an asshole in real life as Hogan, but the point is, I was ready, even eager, to give the new guy a shot. And Riker wouldn't even have been a new guy. He'd have been an established guy who got bumped up from the second lead to the lead, like Dennis Franz on NYPD Blue after Jimmy Smits left and the producers said, "Oh, to hell with it, it's the Sipowicz show now." TNG starring Captain Riker instead of Captain Picard could have worked great. That doesn't mean it would have. It never happened, so we'll never know. But even if it would have worked, the last 4 seasons of the show would have been a lot different, with Riker, not Picard, in the center chair. For starters, Captain Riker would need a new first officer. Maybe Commander Shelby, the Borg specialist introduced in Best of Both Worlds, could have become a regular character and filled that post. A peek at Elizabeth Dennehy's IMDb page suggests she would have been available. Just saying. The tension between Riker and Shelby established in Best of Both Worlds would have made for an interesting dynamic going forward. And it would have been nice to have another woman as a regular on the show, particularly one whose primary mode wasn't a mother or a therapist or some other form of caregiver. Or maybe they would have decided to keep the promote from within thing going, and instead of keeping Shelby on the show as the new first officer, Riker would have promoted one of the other regulars. Data, being the second officer and breakout character, would be the obvious choice, and that would have opened up some potentially interesting avenues of development for him, being in direct command of most of the crew, having a broader range of responsibilities, leading away teams, making command decisions. But there are other ways they could have gone too. Just because Data's the next in line doesn't mean he automatically gets the job. This isn't real life. This is a made-up TV show about people who live on a spaceship and wear their pajamas to work. And even in real life, shit happens. Maybe in the what-if version of the Best of Both Worlds Part 2, Worf distinguishes himself in a valiant but ultimately failed effort to save Picard, or perform some other heroic action to enable the Enterprise to defeat the Borg and save Earth, and Captain Riker elevates him to the position of first officer. With Worf getting promoted, the Enterprise would need a new chief of security, and maybe that's where the producers could have introduced a new character to the regular cast. Perhaps even a woman who, like Shelby, could have broken that caregiver mold and proven herself a tough, tenacious tactical officer, every bit as effective as Worf. And maybe this character's name could be something like Sasha Zar. I'm just brainstorming here. Or how about this? Captain Riker realizes that in these uncertain times, with Picard dead or lost forever to the Borg and the Federation still shaken by the Borg attack, he needs someone he can depend on by his side. So he turns to his oldest, closest, most trusted friend on the ship and makes Deanna Troi his first officer. As we're reminded a year or so after Best of Both Worlds, Troi does hold the rank of Lieutenant Commander, and giving her such an important and clearly established job as first officer would have really helped to break her out of that "Captain, I don't sense anything unusual" rut she'd already fallen into by this point in the series. And, as with Data and Worf, promoting Deanna to first officer opens up some very interesting avenues for her character going forward. Maybe she expresses some reluctance when Riker offers her the job, but Riker convinces her by saying that most of the job is just crew relations, and she does that already, so she has the skill set. But then, after she accepts the promotion, she realizes that as first officer, she'll also be responsible for leading away teams and have a much more command-oriented role on the ship, and that's out of her comfort zone. Maybe she lacks self-confidence in those areas and needs to prove to her crewmates and to herself that she can really do the job, which of course she can. Those are just a few of the possibilities. You can probably think of others. If you do, let me know in the comments. And here's something else for you to think about, because the changes to the show resulting from Picard's departure wouldn't be limited to the introduction of new characters or giving new jobs to some of the regulars. How would some of the classic TNG episodes that followed Best of Both Worlds have been different? For example, how about the very next episode after Best of Both Worlds Part 2, one of my favorite TNG episodes, Family? Riker is barely in it. The major plots center on Picard and Worf, with some Wesley stuff thrown in to pad it out. But if Picard was gone, you'd imagine an episode about the Enterprise returning to Earth for repairs and some shore leave following the Borg attack would feature Riker a lot more prominently. Maybe instead of Picard dropping in on his brother's family, we could see Riker visiting his dad at their family home in Alaska. Or maybe Riker wants to visit his dad, but when he beams down to the house, his dad isn't there, and one of the locals tells him that his dad is off planet on some big deal mission for Starfleet. Or maybe he's paying a booty call at Dr. Pulaski's place. He's not home, is the point, and Riker's like, figures, and he doesn't quite know what to do with himself after that. But then he decides to visit Picard's brother to try to explain in person what happened and to apologize for not being able to save Jean-Luc from the Borg. That could be something. Think about how the Inner Light might work if it was essentially the same premise, but with Riker in the lead instead of Picard. Much of it could remain unchanged. Riker suddenly finding himself living another person's life on a planet he's never heard of, fighting it at first, then eventually accepting it and living out several decades of this new life, joining the community, raising children and grandchildren. But one of the most significant elements of the Inner Light was Picard learning to play the flute during his life as Kamen, which wouldn't have as much of an impact if Riker were the lead instead, because Riker's already a musician, a bone blower of some renown, you might recall. So maybe the what-if version of the Inner Light has Riker continuing his musicianship. Maybe Catan has a musical instrument that's kind of like a trombone. And instead of becoming a scientist like Picard did, Riker becomes a music teacher, connecting with multiple generations of students and finding a kind of fulfillment that he never got, never even thought was possible from his Starfleet career. After he wakes up back on the Enterprise, Deanna visits him in his quarters to deliver a box they found concealed in the space probe that triggered the experience. And inside the box is a scroll of sheet music containing the simple yet beautiful melody Riker wrote for new students to learn during his life on Catan. And the episode ends with Riker trying to work out how to play the melody on his trombone. It's not just the Picard-centric episodes that would have to be reimagined or scrapped altogether in this what-if version of TNG. Some of the Riker episodes would need to be tweaked a bit too. For example, the general premise of Future Imperfect would still work, but instead of a holographic fantasy where Riker's been promoted to captain, it'd have to be one where he's been promoted to admiral, and maybe returning to the Enterprise for the first time in a while, much as the fake future version of Picard is in the actual version of that episode. One of my favorite TNG episodes, the Pegasus, would also need to be reworked a bit, since you'd lose the element of Riker being torn between his loyalty to his former commanding officer, Admiral Pressman, and his current commanding officer, Captain Picard. It could be changed so that Riker's loyalty is divided between Pressman and the crew of the Enterprise. And when Pressman's orders would endanger the ship, that's when Riker finally finds the courage to stand up to Pressman and tell him to piss off. Or something else, I don't know. How would you do it? The dynamic between Riker and Q would need to be developed as well, so as to justify further appearances by John Delancey. I assume we're all in agreement that we wouldn't want to lose John Delancey as a recurring guest star? I thought so. It would also be interesting to see how Riker's relationship with Guinan could develop. Maybe after the loss of Picard, Guinan could consider leaving the ship, but Riker could convince her to stay, saying he'll need a good listener and a good bartender just as much as Picard did. More so, even. And all of this speculation is just about the TV series. If the TNG-era movies still happened in this alternate history, they'd be a lot different too. Would Generations have been better or worse as a Kirk-Riker team-up than Kirk-Picard? And what about First Contact? Making the story about Riker's first major confrontation with the Borg since they killed Picard could have been pretty cool. Or better yet, Picard survives the events of Best of Both Worlds and is still with the Borg all these years later. So instead of the Queen leading the Borg's time travel assault on Earth, it's Locutus. And instead of killing him at the end, Riker finally manages to save his former captain from the Borg. Then, if Patrick Stewart is up for it, Picard can appear in future movies, or if not, the character gets another happier send-off. Either way, it's Riker who has the smoldering romance plot with that ageless hottie Anij in the next film, Insurrection. Sorry about that slip up there. I have no idea how that happened. But it won't happen again. Anyway, I could go on forever imagining ways in which TNG would have been different if Picard had exited the show after Best of Both Worlds and Riker had taken over as the lead protagonist. I'm sure some of you could too, and please do. I'd love to read some of your ideas in the comments, but I think there's a deeper lesson to be learned from all this nerdy what-ifery, and that lesson is that Star Trek is a lot more pliant than a lot of us seem to realize. When Star Trek Discovery premiered a few years ago, a lot of longtime Trekkies complained that it didn't feel like Star Trek, that the technology wasn't appropriate for the era in which it was set, that the tone was off, that the Klingons didn't look like Klingons. And hey, art is subjective. People are allowed to like what they like and not like what they don't like. And if the aesthetic or tone or character and production design of Discovery was not to the liking of some folks, that's fine. It is what it is. Or was what it was, I guess. But it just doesn't feel like Star Trek is the same vague, useless criticism that some people directed toward the Kelvin Timeline films when they started, and Deep Space Nine when it started, and The Next Generation when it started. And let's not forget the people who grumbled about Voyager having a female captain or a black Vulcan. You know who I mean. Thank you. And Deep Space Nine having a black commander. And most recently, some fans objected to Star Trek Lower Decks because, well, Star Trek just shouldn't be a comedy, It's wrong. The point is, you might think Classic Trek or TNG or DS9 or Voyager or Enterprise is how Star Trek is supposed to be, and any version that departs too significantly from that model is doing it wrong. But just remember that no matter which version of Star Trek you consider to be the most authentic, there are others, no less Star Trek fans than you, who think it sucks. It's not about authenticity. It's about what you have gotten used to. We often tend to think of the way things are as the way they're supposed to be. David Hume described this problem in the 18th century when he observed that people frequently and without justification conflate what is with what ought to be. Unless you're a determinist, in which case, good for you, I guess. Not that it matters. There's no reason to treat what did happen as what should have happened, or the only thing that could have happened, or what is as what should be, or the only thing that could be. It's difficult at first for most of us to imagine Star Trek The Next Generation without Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard in the lead, because that's what we got. That's what we're used to. That's what Trekkies my age grew up with. But if history had unfolded differently, if Patrick Stewart had left the show after 3 seasons, if the final 4 years of TNG had been led by Jonathan Frakes as Captain Riker, it would have been different, sure. It might have been worse in some ways. It might have been better in some ways. But it could have worked. It probably would have. By the end of the 3rd season, the fundamentals of TNG were pretty solid, and it would still have been Star Trek. We're all used to Classic Trek being led by Captain Kirk, but if the original pilot had been picked up, it would have been led by Captain Pike. If the show had been more like it's described in the original pitch, it would have been about Captain Robert April and set aboard the starship Yorktown. Whatever the names of the captain and the ship, it would almost certainly have been recognizable as Star Trek. The template it established would not have been that different from that set by the Kirk-led TOS we all know and love. The point is, like what you like, and as long as they're not hurting anybody, let other people like what they like. Insisting on a conception of Star Trek narrowly tailored to your personal taste is really just a way of seeking to exclude people for no good reason. And that's about as contrary to the values of Star Trek, in all its many forms, as you can get. Captain Picard would not approve. And neither would Captain Riker. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I like these what-if videos. It's fun to imagine how Star Trek would have been different if we took out one little thing, or one big thing. In this case, the lead of arguably the most popular series in the franchise. Anyway, the next Trek Actually topic is also a what-if question, and I'll tell you what it is in a minute, but first, I want to give shout-outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons, and their names are Melissa Lantane, thank you Melissa. Red Flettons, thank you Red. Justin Quaranta, thank you Justin. Mark Barnhill, thank you Mark. Nathan Keys, thank you Nathan. Martin Bonnet, thank you Martin. Sean Piper, thank you Sean. Kenneth Stewart, thank you Kenneth. Haley Helms, thank you Haley. MKF, thank you MKF. And Gio Willents, thank you Gio. Those are the names of my newest patrons to pledge $5 a month or more since last month. Thank you to all my patrons, no matter how much you're pledging, however long you've been pledging it, because I could not do this without you. If you're not a patron but you'd like to become one, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives and pledging any amount from $1 a month on up. $5 a month gets you a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video, but any amount gets you access to the patrons only feed where you can vote in polls for upcoming Trek Actually topics and submit questions ahead of time for my bi-weekly Ask Away live streams. If you dig what I do on YouTube and you can spare a few bucks a month, consider helping me out and supporting this channel by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives and becoming a patron. Of course, if you do like what I do, especially the Star Trek related stuff, there are a couple of other projects you might be interested in if you don't know about them already. The first is the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast I do alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole. On the show, Jason and I play low-ranking officers serving aboard the classic Trek version of the Enterprise, and since she joined the show midway through this season, Dana has been playing a variety of characters, including an iguana with a human brain living inside an android body, a mass murderer who has been destroying civilizations in her stolen D7 Klingon battlecruiser, and the long-suffering therapist of Jason's and my characters. She's been doing a fantastic job. Jason, of course, is a genius, and I hold up my end. It's a good show. We like it. We think you'll like it too. We're almost to the end of our third season, and big things are happening. So if you haven't been listening, links are in the description. Check out the Ensign's Log. Dana and I have also been doing another show together right here on my channel. It's called Trek Reluctantly, and it's a watch-along series where we watch episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which Dana has never seen, and Firefly, which I have never seen, and invite you to watch along with us. Just queue up the episode on your end, follow our instructions for when to press play and when to pause, and have fun watching and discussing the episode along with us. Those of you who have been joining us seem like you've been having a good time. We've definitely been having a good time. We stream Trek Reluctantly live every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time right here on this channel. And of course, if you can't catch it live, you can always watch the archived version anytime. It works the same way. And there's a link to the playlist in the description of this video. Come watch Deep Space Nine and Firefly with us. You are invited. Now, as for next month's Regulation Trek Actually video, as I said, it will also be on a what-if topic, but it won't just be about how the fictional world of Star Trek would be different if different creative choices had been made, though there will be a bit of that. It'll be an examination and a bit of speculation centered on one of the great unproduced projects in the history of the franchise, quite possibly the first great unproduced project in the history of the franchise. In fact, the topic of the next video, as chosen by my patrons in the most recently completed poll, will be: would Harlan Ellison's original City on the Edge of Forever actually have been better? Looking forward to dusting off my copy of Harlan Ellison's original City on the Edge of Forever screenplay and diving into this one. That's next month. I'll see you a whole bunch between now and then, but until whenever I see you, take care, everybody.